Welcome back to your channel. Before we begin our journey, we'd love to get to know our wonderful family around the world. Let us know in the comments which country you're watching from. Thank you, enjoy the show, and let us know if you like the story. The kingdom of Ethelgard was a realm woven from the golden threads of prosperity and peace. Yet it was shadowed by a silent, suffocating sorrow. King Roland and Queen Eleanor, beloved by their people and blessed with every earthly riches, sat upon their grand thrones with hearts as barren as the winter tundra. For years, the echoing halls of their magnificent castle, carved from the pale stone of the northern mountains, served only to magnify the absence of a child's laughter. The queen would often stand by the tall, arched windows, gazing out at the sprawling valleys bathed in the amber light of dusk, weeping silent tears that stained her velvet gowns. It seemed the heavens were deaf to their desperate prayers, until, in the twilight of their youth, a miracle was granted. A daughter was born. They named her Aurora, for she brought the dawn into their long, dark night. She was a child of impossible beauty, with wisps of hair that shimmered like spun sunlight, and eyes the color of the clearest summer sky. The kingdom erupted into an unprecedented jubilation. The cobbled streets of the capital were blanketed in crushed rose petals, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, sweet wines, and the joyful melodies of lutes and tambourines. King Roland, his heart swelling with a pride so fierce it brought him to tears, decreed a christening feast of unimaginable grandeur. Kings, queens, dukes, and lords from across the known world were invited, but the most honored guests were the ethereal beings of the realm, the fairies of the hidden glades. There were 7 fairies known to reside within the borders of Ethelgard, beings of pure light and ancient magic. To each, the king presented a golden casket containing plates, goblets, and cutlery forged from pure gold and encrusted with flawless diamonds and rubies. In the grand banquet hall, beneath chandeliers that burned with 1,000 beeswax candles, the fairies began to bestow their magical gifts upon the infant princess, who lay in a cradle carved from the heartwood of a sacred oak. The first fairy, radiating a soft pink hue, gifted Aurora with peerless beauty. The second, shimmering in azure, bestowed the gift of a brilliant mind. The third gave her a voice as sweet as a nightingale's song. The fourth, a heart overflowing with infinite compassion. The fifth, the grace of a swan. And the sixth, the gift of perfect, unwavering courage. But before the 7th fairy could step forward to offer her blessing, a sudden, violent wind tore through the grand hall. The heavy oak doors, barred with iron, were blown open with a deafening crash. The thousands of candles flickered wildly before extinguishing in unison, plunging the joyous assembly into a chilling, oppressive gloom. Out of the swirling darkness stepped a figure that made the blood of the bravest knights run cold. It was Malene, the 8th fairy, the forgotten enchantress of the Black Crag. She had not been seen in a century, presumed dead or vanished into the ether, and thus no golden casket had been prepared for her. Malene's presence was a physical weight in the room. She was draped in tattered robes of midnight silk, her skin the color of old parchment, and her eyes burned with a toxic emerald malice. The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only by the sinister tapping of her twisted black staff against the marble floor. She glided toward the cradle, her gaze fixed upon the innocent child. King Roland drew his broadsword, the steel ringing sharply in the quiet. But a mere flick of Malign's skeletal finger sent the great king flying backward, pinned to the stone wall by an invisible, crushing force. The queen threw herself over the cradle, sobbing, begging for mercy, but Malign only offered a smile that was the very essence of cruelty.
"A magnificent gathering," Mulligan hissed, her voice echoing like the scraping of tombstones. "Such wondrous gifts for the little Dawn. But I, too, have a gift for the princess. Since I was so tragically overlooked, I offer a destiny that shall never be forgotten." She raised her staff, and the emerald crystal at its apex began to pulse with a sickly, corrupt light. "The Princess Aurora shall indeed grow in grace and beauty. She shall be the pride of this kingdom. But on the sun's setting of her 16th birthday, she shall prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel, and she shall die."
A collective gasp of horror tore through the room. The queen fainted, collapsing to the floor in a heap of silk. The king roared in helpless agony. Malignant let out a laugh that shattered the remaining glass in the windows, transforming into a murder of black crows that exploded into the night sky, leaving behind a lingering scent of sulfur and rot. It was then that the seventh fairy, who had hidden herself behind the heavy tapestries, stepped forward. Her light was gentle, a stark contrast to the violent magic that had just assaulted the room. She stood over the weeping king and the unconscious queen, looking down at the baby who, miraculously, was still sleeping peacefully. "My king," she spoke, her voice a soothing balm, "I do not possess the power to entirely undo the dark magic of Malig, for her curse is woven with ancient, blood-deep malice. But I can soften its blow. The princess shall not die. When the spindle pierces her flesh, she shall instead fall into a profound magical slumber, a sleep that shall last for 100 years, until she is awakened by the kiss of true love." Despite the fairy's intervention, the terror of Malin's prophecy consumed King Roland. The very next morning, a royal edict was issued across the land. Every spinning wheel, every spindle, every loom in the kingdom was to be surrendered to the crown. For weeks, the skies above the capital were choked with thick black smoke as massive bonfires consumed the wooden instruments. The king commanded that anyone found possessing a spindle would face immediate execution. He believed, in his desperate paternal arrogance, that he could outwit destiny by destroying the instrument of his daughter's doom. As the years passed, Aurora grew exactly as the fairies had promised. She was a creature of breathtaking beauty and boundless kindness, her laughter ringing through the stone corridors like silver bells. Yet, her life was a gilded cage. She was never allowed outside the castle walls, constantly surrounded by guards and ladies-in-waiting who watched her every move with a suffocating paranoia. She knew nothing of the curse, only that her parents loved her with a desperate, fearful intensity that she could never quite understand. She spent her days reading in the grand library, tending to the roses in the enclosed courtyard, and gazing out at the horizon, wondering what lay beyond the heavy iron gates. The dreaded 16th birthday arrived with a heavy, unspoken tension hanging over the castle. The king and queen had ordered a grand festival to distract themselves and their daughter, believing that if they could just survive this day, the curse would be broken forever. The castle was filled with music, jesters, and feasts, but the king's eyes constantly darted around the room, searching for shadows. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began its slow descent, The royal parents finally allowed themselves to breathe. They had won. The spinning wheels were gone. The prophecy had failed. But magic, especially dark magic woven with vengeance, has a way of finding the cracks in mortal defenses. Amidst the celebrations, Aurora felt a strange, inexplicable pull. It was a subtle sensation, like a whisper in the back of her mind, a melody only she could hear beneath the raucous music of the banquet. Driven by a sudden, overwhelming curiosity, she slipped away from her guards. She wandered through the familiar halls, but the whispering melody guided her toward the oldest, most forgotten wing of the castle. She found herself at the base of a narrow, spiraling stone staircase that she had never seen before. The air here was stale, thick with dust and the weight of forgotten years. Step by step, she climbed into the darkening tower. The melody grew louder, a hypnotic humming that clouded her thoughts and made her limbs feel light and detached. At the very top of the stairs, she reached a small, heavy wooden door. It creaked open at her touch, revealing a circular room bathed in the dying, blood-red light of the setting sun. Sitting in the center of the room was an old woman, her face obscured by a gray hood, her foot rhythmically tapping the treadle of a strange wooden contraption. "Good evening, child," the old woman croaked, her voice deceptively sweet. "Good evening," Aurora replied, her voice trembling slightly, her eyes fixed on the spinning wheel. She had never seen such an object. The turning of the wheel, the blurring of the thread, the sharp, silver point of the spindle. It was mesmerizing. "What is this wondrous thing you are doing?" "I am spinning, my dear," the woman said, stepping aside. "It is an ancient art. Would you like to try?" The compulsion was unbearable. Aurora stepped forward, her hand reaching out as if guided by invisible strings. The air in the room grew freezing cold. The old woman's eyes beneath the hood flashed with a toxic emerald light. "Just touch the spindle, my sweet. Feel how sharp it is." Aurora's delicate finger brushed against the tip of the spindle. A sharp, stinging pain shot through her hand. A single drop of crimson blood welled upon her skin, falling like a ruby onto the dusty floorboards. Instantly, the world tilted. The hypnotic humming was replaced by a roaring in her ears. A crushing wave of exhaustion slammed into her, a fatigue so profound it felt as though her bones were turning to lead. She gasped, stumbling backward, her vision tunneling into darkness. She collapsed onto a moth-eaten velvet chaise in the corner of the room, her eyes closing, her breath slowing to a shallow, imperceptible rhythm. The curse had found its mark. The moment Aurora's eyes closed, the magic exploded outward from the tower like a shockwave of silent, heavy mist. It cascaded down the spiral stairs, flooding the corridors, the grand hall, the kitchens, and the courtyards. Where the mist touched, time ceased. The king, rushing up the stairs in a sudden panic, having noticed his daughter's absence, froze mid-stride, his face etched in eternal terror. The queen, weeping in the courtyard, slumped onto a stone bench, instantly asleep. The guards in the towers collapsed against their halberds. The musicians stopped mid-note, their instruments slipping from their hands. The cooks in the kitchen fell asleep at the hearth, and even the fire itself froze, its flames becoming rigid, glowing sculptures. The dogs in the yard, the horses in the stables, the doves on the roof, every living creature within the castle grounds was plunged into the profound magical coma. But the curse was not yet finished. From the earth surrounding the castle walls, massive, black, thorny vines erupted. They grew with terrifying speed, twisting and writhing like monstrous serpents. They wrapped around the stone towers, crushed the iron gates, and wove themselves into an impenetrable, towering fortress of briars. Within hours, the magnificent castle of Ethelgard was completely swallowed by the dark forest, hidden from the world, entombed in a silent, deadly embrace. Years turned into decades. The seasons washed over the wall of thorns. Snow buried it in winter, rain slicked it in spring, and the harsh sun baked it in summer. But the briars never withered. The kingdom outside the walls slowly forgot the faces of King Roland and Queen Eleanor. The true history faded into myth, and the myth turned into a terrifying legend. The locals whispered of the Briar Rose, the beautiful princess cursed to sleep within a castle of death. Many brave and foolish knights, driven by tales of unimaginable wealth and the promise of a beautiful bride, attempted to hack their way through the thorns. None succeeded. The briars were alive. They would close around the intruders, crushing them in a vise of poisoned spikes, leaving their bleached bones hanging in the vines as a grim warning to the next generation. 100 years passed. The world changed, kingdoms rose and fell, wars were fought, and the age of King Roland became nothing more than a dusty footnote in ancient tomes. In a neighboring kingdom, Prince Julian read the legend of the Briar Rose. Driven by destiny, he rode to the forbidden forest. As he approached, the thorns parted for him because the 100 years were fulfilled. He entered the silent castle and found Princess Aurora in the tower. She was still breathtakingly beautiful. He knelt beside her, moved by a love that transcended time, and pressed his lips against hers. A flash of white light shattered the dark magic. Aurora opened her eyes with a smile, whispering, "You have come at last." At that moment, the entire kingdom woke up. The thorns withered, and a love story that would outlast the ages began.